Welcome to Mighty Married Moms. Join us at our kitchen table twice a week as the Mighty Married Moms, Debbie, Linda, Wendy, invite spectacular guests to weigh in on staying sexy, vibrant, and healthy, building marriages with soul-satisfying connection, raising happy, healthy, successful kids. Conversations with Mighty Married Moms will bring you closer to the life you really want. Episode 45. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mighty Married Moms. Today, we are privileged to be able to introduce you to Dr. Bryan Post from the Post Institute. He is one of America's foremost adoption experts and the founder of the Post Institute for Family-Centered Therapy. The Post Institute specializes in leading-edge education for adults, children, and families who struggle with issues related to early life trauma and the impact of trauma on the development of the mind-body system. A renowned clinician, lecturer, and author of several books, video, and audio programs, Bryan has traveled throughout the world providing expert treatment and consultation to a number of different kinds of groups. An internationally recognized specialist in the treatment of an emotional and behavioral disturbance, Bryan specializes in a love-based treatment approach that focuses on developing a deeper understanding of fear and how it rules our lives. He counters this by offering an enlightening perspective on the all-encompassing power of love to bring us peace and healing. And Bryan, we are just thrilled to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
Great. And for our audience, I happen to bring a copy of one of your books here, From Fear to Love, and I've read it a couple of times at this point, and it has really been a foundational resource for me in my own work as a family and life coach. So this is a special honor for me to be able to meet you. Why don't you tell us very briefly, share with our listeners and our viewers, because this is both video and audio, about your background and how you got to where you were and where you are now.
Okay, sure. And you might have to slow me down. I'm not sure how my voice is coming across when you guys.
You're doing great.
Okay. Well, I was adopted at a very early age. I had a sibling who was also adopted. We weren't biological siblings. And we grew up in a home with parents, my adopted parents, the people I refer to as my parents, who were the oldest of large sibling groups, 10 and 9, and they actually both were children of alcoholics. Both of their fathers were alcoholics. And then my father was a Vietnam veteran and had really severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it was really a kind of a perfect storm of two children with some really core developmental and emotional challenges and needs, with parents who were raised in a very traditional parenting approach. I was born in Oklahoma, so that's where we were raised. And, we just struggled a lot as children, both my sister and I. I tend to say that I had most of the severe behavior problems. In one of my books, The Great Behavior Breakdown, I go over 27 severe behaviors that parents deal with. However, it was my sister who actually struggled the most with my parents. I was more of the golden child because I was more emotionally mature. I was a good athlete in school, and so on that side, I excelled, but I had lots of behavioral and emotional issues and needs, and most of the time I just didn't get caught doing the things that I was doing.
Okay.
However, my sister, her challenges were more emotionally related, and I always say that both of my parents, being mostly the oldest in their sibling groups, were both very parentified. And so they kind of had a hypersensitivity to her emotional delays and challenges, which created a lot of conflict in our home growing up. And so I went through that, and I just kind of stumbled into social work as a college training, and it just fit, unconsciously, like most therapists. I feel like I was kind of compelled to work out my own issues. And,
I've heard of many therapists who do that, yeah.
Absolutely. And I've always been a questioner. I mean, that's a privilege of my history, to always have problems with authority and to never take just the status quo answer of how things are supposed to be. So I always questioned, And I had the great fortune very early in my therapy career to be mentored and trained by some fantastic psychiatrists and therapists doing really good work with children, or at least attempting to. But I even questioned what they were doing, and that process over many years kind of led me, I say led me to love, whereas I was kind of, all my education and then all of my was at the end of the day, it was very conventional. It was very traditional. It was very cognitively focused, and it didn't address at its core the underlying needs of the child or even the underlying needs of parents. And so that kind of led me to pull pieces together and pioneer a system of parenting and therapy, which I believe is as love-based as anything out there. And I believe that ultimately love is the only thing that heals. It is the only thing that makes a difference. And it is the only way to create the world that we want to create. And but love is not easy. I mean, it's
true.
Because fear is so common. We don't believe that we're parenting from a fear-based place because it's so common, because everyone does it. And because everyone does it, we don't ever question, well, why am I doing this, and what are the results I'm going to get? What are the outcomes that everyone else is getting? And so we just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And that's just society, Albert Einstein said that's the definition of insanity. But that's society across the board. And I believe that this model is not just a parenting model. It is a model of human behavior. And I see it from the government on down. And that's why I know it's not easy, but it is effective, and it's effective fast if we can just step into it.
I'm familiar with your model. Could you very briefly describe the model for our viewers and listeners?
Well, it's based around a theory that I came up with pretty much 15 years ago called the stress model. And the stress model is very simple, and I think that because it's so simple, it's really hard to grasp, because that's what our brains do. Our brains want to take very simple things and make them really complex.
Right.
The stress model says at a very basic level, all behavior arises from a state of stress. And in between the behaviors and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. It's through the expression, the processing, and the understanding of the emotion that we calm the stress and diminish the behavior. And everything else is based around that. Also, all the science, and really I was privileged because I was a new and excited therapist during the decade of the brain. And the decade of the brain just reinforced everything that I believed and had been through, through my core and through my own personal experiences. And so it just reinforced my theoretical model and helped me just refine the parenting approach and the therapy approach.
That's great. So that really lays the groundwork for the rest of our conversation. So thank you for explaining that. Go ahead, Wendy.
I don't know what the decade of the brain is. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, the 90s was referred to the decade of the brain because that's when neuroscience really started to see just, number one, at a very basic level. In the 90s, neuroscience finally kind of established that the brain can change. I mean, we had pretty much believed up until that point that pathways don't change, that experiences are hardwired into the brain. And the decade of the brain just helped us to really realize that that's not true. And so you had just some brilliant scientists that gave root to that in regards to emotions and regulation and attachment. Alan Shore, Bruce Perry, Daniel Siegel, Peter Levine, just Bruce Lipton, just fantastic.
Lipton,
yeah, and I just refer to them all as my teachers and my mentors because it just laid the foundation for so much. But even though that's and really there's a neuroscientist at UCLA. His name is Dr. Ramachandran, and so much of what he did really laid the foundation to how pathways change by doing research with mirror neurons. And And it was completely unrelated because he was working with phantom limb syndrome.
Right.
You lose an arm, but they still feel the pain. And he did a very simple experiment. He created a mirror box, and he had the person stick one arm in the mirror box, which made it look like they had two. They moved that hand back and forth, which made the brain believe the other hand with the phantom limb syndrome, the limb that had the pain, it made the brain believe that that limb all of a sudden was actually there and intact and working, and the pain would go away. And so then we realized that pathways really change. And that's just so profound because we've believed for so many years, that kids that have these early experiences, that ultimately they're hardwired and there's nothing that can be done to help. And it's just not true.
So this is great. I mean, a lot of your message and your marketing is really geared toward parents of adopted and foster children. So I would love to just very briefly discuss what are some of the specific issues that those kids have to deal with, and their parents, and how do their parents deal with those challenges. But then also kind of expand that to how parents of challenging kids, regardless of whether or not they're adopted, can deal with some of the same challenging issues.
Please.
And the thing is, it's all the same because we're all the same. And so my passion for adoption and foster care is because I was in foster care and I was adopted.
Right.
So it's just natural and easy for me to speak to that. But in its core, we have all experienced trauma at all various levels, and that's really what it is. It is, when you talk about adoption, you talk about foster care, you're talking about very specific and certain traumatic experiences, and trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. And so when you think about adoption, it's just a traumatic event that occurs at a very early stage in life that wires the brain. It makes the brain more sensitive to sensory experiences moving forward. And parenting is a highly sensory, highly emotional experience. And so that, I always say at the most basic level, if parents can look at their children, and this is really all children, and even if they look at themselves and their spouses, in times of stress, we become more stress sensitive and fearful. And that's all you have to do. It doesn't have to get any more complicated than that. If you're in a state of stress, you are more sensitive to sensory input.
Okay.
And you are more prone to experiencing fear.
Experiencing fear. Okay. Yeah.
This is, help me put this together, but my husband and I developed a way of communicating years ago. We've been together for almost 20 years now. And the short answer is whoever's the most scared wins. And what I mean by that is, or whoever's the most anxious wins is really the way we word it. So the analogy that I give to the couples that I work with is, we're going away for the weekend. We packed up the car. We're all excited. We're an hour north. We live in New England. We're going to go to New Hampshire for the weekend. We're an hour north. And all of a sudden, Wendy says, "Oh, I think I left the stove on." And my husband says, "Wendy, you've never left the stove on. You didn't leave the stove on. Don't worry about it." "Oh, but the house is going to burn down." Oh. So my husband, we've made this decision that he just says, "Got it. You're anxious. We're turning around the car. We're going to go home." And he puts his own needs, his own desire to get to New Hampshire in time or whatever to the side, and we deal with the anxiety, the anxious person. The other person doesn't have to believe it, doesn't have to buy it, doesn't have to eat it, nothing. If you're anxious, that's it. That's where we're going as a couple. We're a team, and we're going to quell that anxiety. And having somebody at your back like that is it's so good. Key, and it really helps. Now, there's nothing theoretical about that. That isn't any social science. But I think it kind of speaks to what you're talking about is the stressful situation is only going to escalate. Wendy's under stress. She's worried that she's left on the stove, and the stress can build and maximize, whereas if somebody comes alongside and says, let's turn down the volume on that stress and address it and move through it and move beyond it. That's what I'm hearing you say, but maybe I'm...
And actually, what you're saying. There is tons of neuroscience to support that.
Great.
Everything that's occurring in that dynamic is just right on track from a regulatory perspective. I mean, because Daniel Goleman, who came up with emotional intelligence back in the day, he wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence, he said that the calmer amygdala, which is your fear receptor in your brain, has the ability to soothe the more stressed out amygdala. And so what's actually happening when you're anxious is your husband's amygdala is just calmer. And by him being calmer, he's able to not get so worked up to need to push his process through, and he's able to support you where you're at. And then you guys turn around, you're soothing your brain, everyone feels better. But even deeper than that, I talk a lot about oxytocin. The real neuroscience that's occurring. Oxytocin is the brain's anti-stress hormone, and it occurs from a different structure called the hypothalamus. And what happens is when your brain becomes anxious, your amygdala is releasing stress hormones. Yeah. When your husband is able to honor your anxiety, what he's able to do is actually keep his own amygdala down, so he's keeping his own cortisol levels down. And in that process, he is releasing oxytocin, the brain's anti-stress hormone. And oxytocin is a learned response in the brain. So by him lowering his cortisol and increasing his oxytocin to honor and support you, he's actually turning on your oxytocin, which then calms your brain down and helps both of you feel better. And that's just, I mean, that's excellent what you guys have agreed to. It's fantastic. I mean, if we could incorporate that in human relationships across the board, we would be so much happier with one another. We would get along so much better.
Right. And you know, it's interesting. I've been reading a lot with Dr. Sue Johnson. Do you know her?
Yeah, I know, I'm familiar.
Yeah, Dr. Sue Johnson does a lot of work with the attachment theory as it applies to married couples or connected couples. So she's taken the childhood work of the plasticity of the brain, and she talks about the fact that when married couples have each other's back like that, it really goes a long, long way. And to be more conscious of that really, really helps. And I just also want to circle back and just say it doesn't matter if the stove is on or not. That's not the important piece. It does
nothing to do with the stove whatsoever.
Correct.
Nothing to do with the stove whatsoever. And so I want to add just another thought to that, because and to me it's so important. I mean, we can take one concept and we can just build on that concept and build on that concept and build on that concept, or I can give you 100 concepts and then you never get any of them because the brain will only hold so much.
Right.
So when you guys are going through that dialogue and you say it really goes a long ways, well, what happens is every time the brain has an experience, it plants a memory seed. Mm-hmm. And the next time that experience occurs again, the brain goes back to the way it was handled the last time. So what you guys are actually doing is you're building trust based on experience. And see, that's what a lot of parents don't get. If they handle an experience the first time in a positive way and everything goes good, and then another experience comes up, the child goes back to that positive experience. But if the parent is not able to reinforce that positive experience, then they plan a negative experience. So the next time a negative experience comes up, the child's brain goes back to that negative experience. And so the parent's brain goes back to that negative experience. So you have this heightened anxiety that starts building, and it's a self-perpetuating negative feedback.
Totally. Can you talk to us a little bit about how parents can intentionally create these positive experiences with their kids? If the kid's freaking out, either because they're yelling and angry, or they're scared, or whatever the freaking out may be caused by.
Yeah, and it's so multi-layered because it's all connected to our brainstem and our memory process. When a child starts freaking out, the first signal from the parent is to want to freak out too, because it rattles their brainstem. And once it rattles their brainstem, it stirs up the parent's own memory system. And if there's a lot of negativity in that memory system, then that's what drives the parents' next responses. It drives their thinking. It drives everything. So for parents who want to approach things in a more mindful way, in a more conscious way, it's important for them to spend some time just thinking about what are their messages, what are their stories around various negative behaviors, what are their stories around behaviors that have a lot of emotional intensity. Because see, that's the other thing. A lot of us have lots of negative imprints around emotional intensity. My early imprints around emotional intensity is an angry father. And so, anytime there's a really emotionally charged situation, my brain wants to go back to my angry father and me feeling helpless and out of control as a child. But I've learned to know and to be conscious of the fact that that's there, so I don't have to keep going back to that over and over again, and I can plant new seeds on top of it. So the first thing for parents is just to do a little bit of self-awareness and self-discovery, just to make more conscious material that's there. And then the second thing is when their child becomes so anxious and upset in any given situation, is just to realize it's really not about them. See, it's not about the parent. I mean, it really has nothing to do with what the parent's doing or what's going on. It has everything to do with where the child is in that moment and everything to do with what the child has experienced. That's what the child's tapping into. So the parent's goal has to be, how can, in the midst of this negative experience, how can I create a positive experience? And then it becomes a process. See, we are so behavior focused as a society. We're so outcomes focused as a society that we forget that every outcome is dictated by a process. You have to be willing to go through a process of repetition, of doing things a certain way before behavior change happens. And that's at a very core level. Those are essentials.
When you talk about the slowing down and like the positive, creating something positive out of a negative, would you say that you're building up one another's, whoever, the parent, the child, the husband, the wife, whatever the dynamic is, building up people's resiliency? We've also had conversations with people about resiliency.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And Bruce Perry said about 10 years ago, he said that traumatized children are not resilient, they're malleable. And I like to think of that because we think of resiliency as bouncing back, but really it's a shaping that is occurring. And in the shaping, it's just like you take clay, a block of clay, and you work with it until you mold it into something. And when a part breaks off, well, you have to start working to remold that part again. So we are very malleable in that way, and that's where repetition and a process really comes into place. Because see, a lot of times we think that children should just, that they should or that they can just bounce back from these experiences that they have. When the reality is I'm still molding my own brain every single day.
That's true.
And I'm 42 years old, and I've been doing this work for 20 years, and I'm still molding my brain every single day. And so when we take that shaping perspective, then we can realize that every interaction, it's not going to be perfect because we're not perfect. It's not going to be absent stress. It's not going to be absent fear. But every interaction, we have the ability to mold and remold, and if we mess up, we just go back and start remolding again. Okay. And that's how you build something beautiful.
So we're getting close to the end of our time, but I would love if we could just pick one thing that most parents have to deal with on a, that happens with one or more of their kids on some sort of a regular basis. And I mean, we could pick there are all sorts of things. We could pick defiance, we could put cheating, but let's just pick lying. And I know you have a free resource on your website about this, but if you could just kind of talk through with us, because most parents deal with lying kids at some point in time. What is your procedure for, what's your process for helping parents deal with a lying kid?
So at the end of the day, it really is all the same. The one thing that most parents have to deal with all the time with all of their children and even with themselves, which does not change because it's the one thing that we all have to deal with, and that is overcoming our fear and allowing love to do its work. That's the one thing in all situations that we all have to deal with. When it comes to lying, it is no different. I say ignore the lie, don't ignore the child. Ignore the behavior, don't ignore the child. Calm yourself down first when your child is telling a lie because you already know it's a lie, so why get worked up about it? Calm yourself down, take a step back.
How dare you lie to me is what they,
Exactly, and that's just an old imprint. That's an old imprint we've been hearing since we were 2 years old.
Right.
And so you calm your brain down. You see in that moment that your child is scared and that they're stressed. They're basically one and the same. Stress and fear work hand in hand. Yeah. And so in that moment, you know your child's lying. You calm yourself down so you can calm your own brain down. You can release oxytocin. You say to your child, and this is how you ignore the behavior but not the child. You say to your child, everything's going to be okay. I just want you to know everything's going to be okay. We're all right. And then you walk away. Because now you want to give your child time to calm down. You want to give their brain time to calm down. Because in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. So as long as your child is stressed out, they're not thinking clearly, they can't do anything but lie. And I always say with traumatized children, when they're stressed out, and in the instance of lying, the worst thing that ever happened to them is threatening to happen again. So they have no other option, no other resource except to lie. And any of us in that situation would lie. So by giving them an opportunity to calm themselves down, by you walking away, removing the threat, you're actually giving their brain an opportunity to settle down. You're giving them an opportunity to not feel so threatening and overwhelming. And then an hour or two later, you come back and you say, you know what, honey? I love you and I care about you. And when you tell me a lie, you don't say, when you told me a lie. And you don't say, now tell me the truth. All you say is, when you tell me a lie. And the child immediately starts thinking, okay, which lie are they talking about? You know?
Yeah, which one? Right.
Yeah, which one? When you tell me a lie, it scares me because it makes me feel like you don't trust me. And if you don't trust me, I can't take care of you. I can't keep you safe. I want you to know we're going to be okay. Do you understand? Child shakes their head. You never even have to address the lie itself because the lie itself is not important. It's irrelevant. What's important is the process of helping your child understand that in that moment of stress, in that moment of fear, you loving them and you believing in them and them trusting that you're not going to hurt them, you're not going to abandon them, you're not going to reject them.
Great.
The most important thing. And I've had parents who have practice that little bitty formula, and they've done it one time. It doesn't always happen this quick. But I've had parents do it one time, and their children have stopped lying because in that moment, their child gets that seed planted in there right on top of their brainstem that covers everything else that says, "I'm not going to die. It's okay to take the risk to tell the truth."
Yeah,
that's a very hard thing.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I hate to end here because there's so much that we could go into. I just want to encourage our viewers and listeners, please, to go to Bryan's website, which is postinstitute.com, or you can also find him on Facebook at Post Institute. And he has a free resource on his website about lying. So if you want to get the exact step-by-step, I encourage you to go get it there. And there's a whole bunch of other resources as well. And so thank you so much for being with us today, Bryan.
Thank you, Bryan.
Yeah,
do you have anything?
Keep up the great work.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have anything coming up that you want to share with our viewers and listeners? Any other places you want them to check you out on?
No, if they go through the website, they'll pretty much get postinstitute.com. They'll always get alerts on what we've got going on and where I may be speaking, or
great.
We try to get lots of resources just to educate and support.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so very much. Learned a ton.
Yeah.
And I got some affirmation, which I always like.
All right, everybody. Thank you for being part of Mighty Married Moms. We are thrilled that you were able to be with us today. I encourage you to go to iTunes and subscribe, and please share on social media, because the more you share, the more we get this message out, and the more people will be helped by people such as our guest today, Dr. Bryan Post. So please go subscribe and share, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mighty Married Moms. Tune in twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays to meet fascinating and inspiring guests who will help you create the life you've always wanted.
You can find these episodes and special gifts just for you at mightymarriedmoms.com, as well as a link to our Facebook community,
where we continue the conversation around the kitchen table. Please also help share the love by leaving a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.